Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates. Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 25th of November 2021 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on the screen. Time-stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Before starting the discussion, there is a small announcement. Continuing with our weekly series of mains assignment question, the question for this particular week here is, of late, India-Russia relations has seen a downside trend in the last few years. Identify the causes behind this trend and provide potential solutions that could revive the all-weather friendship status between the two countries. Now, before writing the answer to this particular question, I suggest you to go through the DNS dated 28th of October 2021.
Before starting today's discussion, we have an announcement for you. RAU'S IAS is conducting the pre-parikshan, which is an all-India free mock test on this weekend, that is 26th November to 28th November. This is a real simulation of the actual prelims examination and will be very helpful for you to analyze your current level of preparation and devise a strategy to clear the prelims examination 2022. In this regard, we are also providing you the scholarships for General Studies Integrated Quality Improvement Program, which will be a year-long program and will be providing you the current affair classes on every weekend and also the dedicated classes for prelims as well as the mains examination. This also includes the test series from the prelims as well as the mains point of view. So what are you waiting for? Register on the ELEARN platform, appear for the test and get top ranks to get these scholarships in GSI QIP program.
The first article for today's analysis appears on page number 6, that is the lead article, as well as page number 9. I hope all of you must be aware that the government of India has recently decided to repeal the 3 farm laws which it had earlier introduced in order to reform the agricultural marketing regime. However, the farmers have still continued with their protest, demanding for the legalization of the minimum support price. The article that we are going to discuss here shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian Economy, specifically under the subsection of issues related to the minimum support price. Please take a pause and have a look at the previous year questions which have been asked with respect to MSP, both in prelims as well as the mains examination. So based upon the analysis of the previous year questions, one can expect various questions related to the MSP, such as the method of calculation of MSP, that is how the MSP is calculated, which all commodities are covered under MSP, and who declares the MSP. This becomes important as far as your prelims examination is concerned. From the perspective of the mains examination, looking at the current debate about the legalization of MSP, one should be aware about the pros and cons of legalizing the MSP. That is, whether we should legalize the MSP or not, and will it solve the problems of the farmers. So based upon the analysis of our article, you should be in a position to attend these 3 prelims questions for practice. Apart from that, you should also be in a position to write an answer to this particular mains question for practice. The question here is, the recent farmer protests have ignited the debate about the legalization of the minimum support price. Do you think the legalization of MSP would solve the present problems of agriculture? Argue. See, before going through the analysis of today's article, I suggest you to go through 2 important articles. One article is related to the basics concepts about MSP. This was covered in the DNS dated 11th of November 2021. And the second article is related to the critical analysis of the farm laws. In this particular article, I have basically discussed as to what are the current problems in the agriculture marketing regime, how the farm laws would have benefited the farmers, what concerns have been raised in the farm laws, and so on. So if you understand these 2 articles, your ability to comprehend or understand whether the government should legalize the MSP or not would be much more better. So before understanding as to whether we must legalize the MSP or not, let us first understand as to what do you mean by the legalization of MSP. See, you all know that the government declares the MSP for 22 major agricultural commodities. To this, if you add sugarcane, for which we declare the FRP, the total number of agricultural commodities would be equal to 23. For these 22 major agricultural commodities, we declare the minimum support price. Now, this MSP, which is declared by the government, does not enjoy the statutory status, which means there is no law which puts an obligation on the government to purchase all of these 22 major agricultural commodities at MSP. That's the first thing. Secondly, there is no obligation on the private sector to purchase these 22 agricultural commodities at minimum support price. What this means is, if the private traders want to purchase agricultural commodities from the farmers, the private traders can purchase them at a price which is below the minimum support price. And even if they do that, there will be no penalty on the traders. So traders as such will not be imposed any penalties if they purchase agricultural commodities from the farmers at below the minimum support price. So this is how presently the MSP works. Now this working mechanism of MSP is little different when you look at the FRP, that is fair and remunerative price, which we declare for the sugar cane. The FRP for the sugarcane, this is declared under the Sugarcane Control Order 1966, which in turn is issued under the Essential Commodities Act 1955. This shows us that FRP enjoys a statutory status unlike the MSP. So if a particular sugar mill buys the sugarcane from the farmers at a price which is below the FRP, it is illegal. They will be penalized. So basic demand of the farmers is that whatever status the FRP right now enjoys, the same status should be given to MSP as well. So if you legalize MSP, what does it mean? First and foremost, we must incorporate MSP into a law. So just like how FRP has been issued under the Essential Commodities Act 1955, MSP should be incorporated into a law framed by the Indian Parliament. That's the first thing. Second, once the MSP is declared, the government should guarantee the procurement of all the crops for which the MSP is declared, which means the government here should guarantee the procurement of all of these 22 major agricultural commodities for which we are declaring the MSP. Third aspect is, if a private entity or a private trader procures any of these agricultural commodities below the MSP, such a private trader will be penalized. So it will become illegal for a private trader to purchase the agricultural commodities at below the minimum support price. So having understood as to what do you mean by legalization of MSP, let us now understand as to why are the farmers demanding for its legalization. See, usually the government declares the MSP before the sowing season, that is before the Kharif and the Rabi season. So once the MSP is declared, the farmers would have a fair idea as to how much price they would get on their agricultural produce. So based upon this kind of price assurance, the farmers would then undertake investment and cultivate different agricultural commodities. So once these crops are harvested, the farmers have two options. Option number one, they can go and sell the agricultural produce to the Food Corporation of India, wherein the Food Corporation of India pays them a price which is equivalent to the minimum support price, or they can exercise the second option of selling the agricultural produce to the private traders in the APMCs. So ideally, the farmers as such have two options. Option one, they can go and sell it to the FCI and they get a price which is equivalent to MSP. And option two, they can sell the agricultural produce to the private traders in the APMCs, where ideally, I repeat, ideally, they should get a price which is higher than the minimum support price. So once we are able to give such kind of options to the farmers will be able to get higher prices. This in turn will help us increase their income levels. So this is what the MSP should ideally do. So the overall success of MSP in turn depends upon two important factors. The first and foremost important factor here is the government should guarantee the procurement of the agricultural commodities. That's the first thing. And secondly, when the farmers are selling the agricultural produce to the private traders in the APMCs, they should get a price which is higher than the minimum support price. So this is an idealistic scenario. But the way the MSP is presently functioning, it is quite different from the ideal scenario. This is so because presently the government is not undertaking the procurement of all the 22 major commodities. The procurement as such is strong only for rice and wheat, whereas the procurement for other agricultural commodities, particularly the procurement of pulses, oil seeds, and other agricultural commodities, it is not very strong, because of which the farmers who are cultivating other agricultural commodities do not have an option of selling the agricultural commodities to the Food Corporation of India. They have only the other option, that is to sell the agricultural commodities to the traders in the APMCs. And when they are selling the agricultural produce to the traders in the APMCs, they are getting a price which is actually below the minimum support price. Now, for example, if you see how much of food grains is actually procured by the government, as per some of the estimates, only 30% of the volume of agricultural produce is procured at minimum support price, and most of which happens to be rice and wheat. Apart from that, only 7% of the value of agricultural produce is procured at MSP. So, very less amount of agricultural produce is procured by the government. So the first demand of the farmers is that the government should guarantee the procurement of all the crops for which the MSP is declared. Secondly, see, present MSP regime benefits only 6% of the farmers. This particular fact has been highlighted by the Shanta Kumar Committee on the FCI reforms. So since the government is undertaking procurement of only few agricultural commodities, it is benefiting only few farmers. So the idea here is, if you legalize the MSP, it will be able to benefit all the farmers. And thirdly, as I stated before, when the farmers are selling the agricultural produce, particularly pulses, oil seeds, and other agricultural produce in the APMCs, they are getting a price which is below the minimum support price. So if we legalize the MSP, then we would be able to force the middlemen and the traders to purchase agricultural commodities from the farmers at a price which is higher than the minimum support price. So this in a way will help us to end the exploitation of the farmers by the middlemen and the traders. However, it has been highlighted that the legalization of MSP would go against the very interests of the farmers whose income levels we are trying to increase. It would go also against the interests of the Indian agriculture, and it would have an adverse impact on the Indian economy. Apart from that, some of the economists have also raised concerns that the legalization of MSP would pose financing and administrative challenges. So let's understand as to what are the problems with respect to legalization of MSP. So let's first understand as to what would happen when the government would guarantee the procurement of all the agricultural commodities for which we are declaring the MSP. Now, when we legalize the MSP, the government would be undoubtedly required to procure all the 22 major agricultural commodities for which we are declaring the MSP. So, first and foremost, we do not have the requisite administrative capacity to undertake the procurement of all the agricultural commodities. So, that is the first problem. Even if you want to undertake the procurement, the amount of money that will be needed to undertake the procurement, this is very huge. This is as high as rupees 17 lakh crores. If you have not been able to understand as to how much is 17 lakh crores, this is the total amount of money which the government raises both through direct and indirect taxes in a single financial year. So whatever money which we are collecting through direct and indirect taxes, all of that money we would have to use it in order to procure the agricultural commodities from the farmers at MSP. So this is undoubtedly going to be extremely challenging, particularly with respect to financing. Some economists have highlighted that this money, that is 17 lakh crores, this amounts to 50% of our union budget. So financing is going to be a very big constraint. Apart from that, let's say even if we implement the legalization of MSP and if we start procuring all of these agricultural commodities, the next problem which we'll encounter here is the food grain management policy will become highly unsustainable. Particularly if you look at our food subsidy bill, the food subsidy bill has already ballooned to rupees 2 lakh crores. Apart from that, since the Food Corporation of India is ending up procuring more amount of food grains from the open market, the buffer stock has drastically increased. And the higher buffer stock has in turn led to higher amount of wastages because we do not have adequate storage capacity. It has also led to the higher storage cost also. Further, it has also been highlighted that if the government spends more amount of money in purchasing the agricultural commodities from the farmers at MSP, it would mean that the government would have less amount of money to undertake investment in the Indian agriculture, particularly that investment that will help us solve the present structural problems of Indian agriculture. So, what are the present structural problems? The structural problems such as lack of irrigation facilities, the fragmented land holdings, lack of access to various inputs such as seeds, fertilizers, credit, and so on. So, if the government is spending more amount of money on MSP, it would mean that the government would have less amount of money to address the structural problems affecting the Indian agriculture. And if you're not being able to solve the structural problems, obviously we would not be able to increase the income levels of the farmers. So this is the impact as far as the guaranteed public procurement by the government is concerned. Let's now understand as to what would be the impact if you put an obligation on the private traders to purchase the agricultural commodities at above the minimum support price. It is being said that if you put such an obligation on the private traders, it would end up affecting the interest of the farmers. Let's understand how. So here when we legalize MSP, it would mean that the private traders will not be allowed to purchase agricultural commodities at below the MSP. And if they do that, they will be penalized and it will be illegal to do so. So what will happen in this particular case? Now let's say there is a bumper harvest of a particular agricultural commodity in a particular year. Now let's say there is a bumper harvest of pulses in a particular year. Now because of the bumper harvest, the overall supply of pulses will be more than the demand, right? So because the supply is more than the demand, the prices of pulses will drop down to below MSP, right? So this is because of demand supply mismatch. So when the prices drop down to below MSP, in that case, no private entity will come forward to purchase the pulses from the farmers. This is so because if they purchase the pulses from the farmers at the market price, which has now dropped down to below MSP, they will be penalized. It will be illegal for the traders to do so. So traders will not come forward to purchase the agricultural commodities from the farmers, particularly when there is a bumper harvest. Ideally, whenever there is a bumper harvest, the farmers would be able to get good prices on their agriculture produce. But in this case, this will not be possible if we legalize the MSP. So traders as such will be reluctant to purchase agricultural commodities from the farmers. And if that happens, the agricultural marketing in India will remain underdeveloped, which means that the private entities will not come forward to purchase agricultural commodities from the farmers. And because of this underdeveloped marketing infrastructure, the farmers will not be able to get good prices on their agricultural produce. That is why it is being said that if you put an obligation on the government to procure all the 22 major agricultural commodities, or if you put an obligation on the private traders to purchase agricultural commodities at above MSP, this can go against the interest of the farmers, it can go against the interest of the agriculture, and it also raises concerns with respect to financing needs as well as administrative challenges. So as you can see, some of the points I have already highlighted here with respect to how it can go against the interest of farmers, how it can go against the interest of economy. For example, if you legalize the MSP, automatically there would be increase in food prices and this will lead to increase in inflation. Now to control inflation, RBI would be required to increase the policy rates such as the repo rate, and if the policy rates increases in the economy, this will lead to a decrease in the credit creation. So amount of loans given in the economy would reduce and this can lead to decrease in the GDP growth rate. Similarly, if we declare higher prices under MSP, this will reduce the exports from India and this will lead to decrease in the income levels of the farmers. As far as financing needs is concerned, I have already discussed this that the food subsidy bill has become quite unsustainable. Procurement of all the crops would cost us half of the union budget. higher expenditure on MSP would lead to decline in the investment on agriculture, and this will lead to decrease in the income levels. As far as administrative challenges is concerned, we do not have the requisite capacity to undertake procurement at an all India level. There is absence of storage infrastructure, which can lead to higher wastages. Apart from that, if the traders are purchasing the agricultural commodities from the farmers at below the minimum support price, the farmers would have to approach the courts. But we all know that the judiciary is already overburdened with a number of cases. So there will be a huge delay in the disposal of cases, which is once again a very big administrative nightmare. And lastly, I hope all of you must be knowing that under the agreement on agriculture, there is a limit on how much of subsidies can be given to the farmers. So MSP is also considered to be one of the subsidies. Already India has violated the limit on the subsidies provided under the agreement on agriculture. As far as this violation is concerned, presently there is a peace clause which has been negotiated between India and the developed countries, and India is now demanding for a permanent solution. So if we go for legalization of MSP, it will become very difficult for India to find a permanent solution to this particular problem. So having looked at pros and cons, the question before us right now is, should we legalize the MSP or not? See here, whenever we are deciding to implement a particular policy, any policy has a trade-off. Trade-off means a policy will have basically benefits and certain concerns. If the benefits are more than the concerns and challenges, then the policy should be implemented. On the other hand, if concerns and challenges are more than the benefits that would accrue, then such a policy should not be implemented. As far as the legalization of MSP is concerned, it is being said that the concerns and challenges outweigh the benefits, which means that it would become an administrative nightmare for India to legalize MSP. It would become a financial nightmare, and it would go against the interests of the farmers, agriculture, as well as Indian economy. So the concerns and challenges are far, far higher than the benefits that would accrue to us. So accordingly, some of the economists have highlighted that legalization of MSP would be a bad idea in India. In that case, how will you ensure that the farmers are getting right prices for their agriculture produce? How will you ensure that the farmers are not being exploited by the middlemen and the traders? See, obviously, we would want to increase the prices received by the farmers. Obviously, we would want to increase their income levels. But the question which has to be asked here is legalizing MSP the only way to increase their income levels or to ensure that they are getting higher prices? No. Apart from MSP, there are other different ways and mechanisms. In fact, far effective mechanisms before us in protecting the interests of the farmers. Now, for example, let's look at the dairy sector. Now, in case of dairy sector, we do not have the concept of MSP. The government is not undertaking direct procurement of milk, nor are we forcing the private sector to procure milk at a particular price. In spite of that, the dairy sector has seen a huge success. This is evident in the Operation Flood or the White Revolution, which India has been able to usher in. So how are we able to ensure the success of the dairy sector? How were we able to increase the income levels of the dairy farmers? Now, we were able to strengthen the dairy sector by organizing the farmers into cooperatives. So by organizing the farmers into cooperatives, we were able to enhance their bargaining powers. Secondly, we strengthened the marketing regime for milk. We provided the necessary hand-holding support to the dairy cooperatives in form of the cheaper credit, marketing facilities, and so on. So what I'm trying to say here is we were able to have a huge success in the dairy sector without assuring certain prices to the farmers. So the same thing has to be replicated even in the agriculture sector as well. So if you have to ensure that the farmers get right prices from the agriculture produce, if you have to ensure the farmers are not exploited by the middlemen and the traders, MSP is not the only way. We have far effective means to increase the income levels of the farmers. For example, we would have to strengthen the agricultural marketing. Secondly, we would have to enhance the bargaining powers of the farmers, and we would have to bring about the necessary reforms in the marketing regime. So in case if you have gone through this particular article related to the critical analysis of the farm laws. In this particular article, I have discussed as to what kind of reforms would have to be brought in the agriculture marketing. So by bringing about the necessary reforms in the agriculture marketing, we would be able to ensure that the farmers are getting right prices for their agricultural produce. Now, based upon the analysis of this particular article, please try to attempt these three practice questions and let me know the answer in the comment section given below. Apart from that, please also try to write an answer to this particular mains question for the practice. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now, this particular article appears on page number 1 of the Hindu supplement, that is text and context. This article highlights about the failure of the pre-consultative legislative policy. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS paper 2, Polity and Governance. One can expect a direct question in the mains related to various aspects of the pre-legislative consultation. So as part of this particular analysis, we'll understand as to what do you mean by the pre-legislative consultation, what is the need for the pre-legislative consultation, what is the present policy framework, what are the current issues, and how these issues can be addressed. See, normally the government or a concerned ministry introduces a bill in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. So this particular bill, once it is introduced, necessary discussion takes place on various provisions of the bill. The bill is debated in the parliament and then it is finally passed. Now, one of the main problems with respect to passage of such a bill is that people's views, opinions, concerns may not be taken into account. So such a bill is purely debated or discussed among the lawmakers, that is MPs in case of centre or MLAs in case of the concerned states. So there is a very limited role of the people in the passage of the bills. And usually when bills are passed without taking into account views, opinions, concerns of the people, usually such bills are opposed by the people and it may lead to the failure of the policies. This can be seen with respect to the recent rollback of the farm laws or with respect to the opposition to the recently passed labor codes. So usually when the government passes a bill without taking into account the views of the stakeholders, such policies are normally not accepted and hence it leads to their failure. So as part of the pre-legislative consultation, even before the bill is introduced in the parliament, the concerned ministry places the bill in the public domain. Once this is placed in the public domain, the concerned ministry then invites views, opinions and concerns from various stakeholders. So by taking into account their views and opinions, it may then decide to make certain changes in the bill if it deems necessary. So when such a bill is then discussed, debated and passed, this will in turn enable us to strengthen the democracy. The democracy would become more participative, where people are participating in the democratic process not just once in 5 years during the elections, but here people are regularly involved in the important discussions of the bills. So here the democracy would become more participative and citizenry would be more enlightened. Apart from that, it will also help us to formulate better policies because when the government takes the views of the stakeholders, the government can identify the challenges and critical gaps. For example, let's say the government is coming out with a bill with respect to improving the healthcare infrastructure. If the government takes the views of doctors, nurses, etc., then the government will get to know the ground realities as far as the healthcare infrastructure is concerned. And accordingly, we would be able to formulate a much better policy. Further, since these people, they work at the ground level, they would be able to provide the necessary technical expertise and expert advice in the formulation of policies. Now, for example, let's say you are making a particular economic policy related to boosting of exports, then ideally the government must take opinion from various industrial bodies such as FICCI, Confederation of Indian Industry, and various other stakeholders so that we are able to identify the critical gaps. We also get the necessary expert and technical advice. Based upon that, the policies would be far more effective. Similarly, when the policies are formulated based upon the inputs of the various stakeholders, such policies are more accepted, leading to their success. So here we have some important case studies as to how various civil society organizations have enabled us to come up with landmark legislations. For example, the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan has played a very pivotal role in advocating for the MG Narega, which has now proved to be a huge success. Similarly, it was another civil society organization known as the National Campaign for People's Right to Information, which played a very significant role in advocating the cause for the Right to Information Act. So these two major acts, that is right to information as well as MG Narega, have come into being because of the participative process. So as you can see, the pre-legislative consultation will help us strengthen democracy. It will help us formulate better policies and ensure that the policies are successful at the ground level. So in order to have this kind of pre-legislative consultation, the National Commission to Review the Working of Indian Constitution had advocated the government to adopt the pre-legislative consultation policy. So based upon the recommendations of the National Commission to Review the Working of Indian Constitution, the government had adopted such a policy in the year 2014. As per this particular policy, whenever the government wants to introduce a new bill in the parliament, the draft version of the bill has to be placed in the public domain for minimum 30 days. The government should also provide the summary of the bill in the simple language so that the common people can understand the overall intent and the provisions of the bill. So once the people understand the intent and provisions of the bill, the people can then provide the feedbacks. Now, this particular policy also calls upon the government to upload the feedbacks and take into account the feedbacks while finalizing the bill. However, as this particular article has highlighted, this particular policy has failed. This is mainly on the account of the fact that this particular policy is only enabling in nature. It is not mandatory for the government or a concerned ministry to take views and opinions from the stakeholders. It is not mandatory for a ministry to place a draft version of the bill in the public domain. So that is why most of the time bills are passed by the Indian Parliament without taking into account the views and opinions of the stakeholders. This particular article has highlighted that out of almost like 300 bills introduced in the Parliament, 221 bills have been passed without any prior consultation. So in order to strengthen the pre-legislative consultation, this particular article has given certain strategies. Let us understand these strategies. First and foremost, we would have to empower the citizens so that they can participate in the pre-legislative consultation, and that must be done through a necessary amendments in the law. So there should be a law which actually puts an obligation on the government ministry to compulsorily or mandatorily take the views and opinions of the stakeholders before presenting the bill in the parliament. So that's the first thing. Secondly, once the views and opinions of the stakeholders are taken into account, these views and opinions should also be presented along with the bill before the parliament, so that when the bill is being discussed, when the bill is being debated, even the lawmakers can have access to the views and opinions expressed by the stakeholders. So we would have to bring about necessary amendments in the manual of parliamentary procedures so that when a bill is introduced in the parliament, along with the bill, the views and opinions of the stakeholders should also be presented. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. The next article appears on page number 12. See, right now in case of India, you have different types of banks such as the scheduled commercial banks, regional rural banks, cooperative banks, differentiated banks such as the payment banks, small finance banks, and so on. See, recently the Niti Aayog has come up with a new concept paper. In this particular concept paper, the Niti Aayog has proposed for a new category of banks known as the digital banks. According to Niti Aayog, the digital banks would help us improve the financial inclusion and improve the credit creation in the Indian economy. So far, this is just a proposal put forward by Niti Aayog, and now the Niti Aayog has invited the public comments. So, as far as your prelims examination is concerned, you should understand the concept and meaning of the digital banks as to how these digital banks are different from the normal banks. And as far as the mains examination is concerned, we must understand as to why is Niti Aayog pitching forward the idea of the digital banks. So based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attempt this particular prelims question for practice. And the main question for practice here is, despite the rapid strides, the lack of financial inclusion remains a challenge. In the light of this statement, examine the need for the digital banks in India. Now, this particular topic of digital banks becomes important from the perspective of prelims because, as you can see in the previous year prelims, that is in prelims 2016 and 2017, questions have been asked with respect to the differentiated banks, that is the payment banks and small finance banks. Accordingly, as part of this particular video analysis, let us understand as to what are the digital banks and why has Niti Aayog pitched forward the idea of the digital banks in India. So in case of India, you must have come across the scheduled commercial banks such as the State Bank of India, ICICI, Axis Bank and so on. Now all of these banks, they have been given the license under the Banking Regulation Act 1949. So these banks provide various kinds of banking services such as acceptance of deposits, giving of loans, transfer of money from one account to another and so on. But to provide these services as such, these banks must compulsorily have the physical branches. Without having physical branches, they cannot provide the banking services. Obviously, these banks also leverage technology to provide banking services. Now, for example, ICICI, it has its own app known as iMobile. Through this iMobile app, you can do various kinds of banking transactions such as acceptance of loans from the banks, transfer of money, and so on. But the basic prerequisite for each of these scheduled commercial banks is compulsorily they must have the physical branches. Without having physical branches, they cannot provide banking services. So if you look at the idea of digital banks, these digital banks, just like the normal scheduled commercial banks, they will be given license under the Banking Regulation Act 1949. Just like the scheduled commercial banks provide for various kinds of banking related services, even the digital banks will provide all the banking services. But one basic difference here is, while the scheduled commercial banks must compulsorily have the physical branches, there is no need for the digital banks to have the physical branches. The digital banks can leverage the information and communication technology to provide banking related services. So that is the basic idea of digital banks. So here the digital banks, they will be registered under the Banking Regulation Act. They will provide all the banking related services, but they will not have any kind of physical branches in India. So that is the basic idea. So this concept of digital bank, it has been used at a global level. More importantly, it has been quite successful in UK. So in UK, you have some famous digital banks such as the Starling Bank, Moni's Bank, and so on. Now these digital banks, they are actually the small retail banks. But since they are able to leverage technology, that is information and communication technology, they are considered to be more efficient in comparison to the conventional banks. Because of which these small retail banks, they are able to challenge the business models of the big established banks. That is why these digital banks are sometimes also referred to as the challenger banks. Now question is, why do we need the digital banks in India? The first aspect is with respect to the underdeveloped banking sector. See, banking sector in any economy is extremely critical. The banking sector helps the overall growth and development of an economy. That is why if you look at the most developed economies such as say US, UK, China, etc., these economies have a very well developed banking sector. But unfortunately, as highlighted by the Economic Survey 2019-20, the banking sector in case of India has remained quite small in comparison to the size of our economy. Now, for example, India has just one bank in the top 100 global banks across the world. And this bank happens to be the State Bank of India, which is ranked at 55th place in terms of the overall size of the banks across the world. Whereas if you look at China, China has almost like 18 banks in the global top 100 banks. Apart from that, the credit to GDP ratio in case of India has also remained quite lower in comparison to other countries. So clearly the banking sector has remained underdeveloped. It has remained quite rough in comparison to the size of our economy. So it is expected that the entry of digital banks will help us to develop the banking sector. We will have more number of banks in India and at the same time improve the credit to GDP ratio. That's the first reason. Second reason here is the banking sector, which has remained quite small or rough. This banking sector has come to be dominated by the public sector banks, which alone account for 70% of the banking assets. So, in a way, the government enjoys the monopoly in the banking sector. But the problem here is the balance sheet of these public sector banks has come to be dominated with more amount of non-performing assets. The NPAs are concentrated more in the balance sheets of PSPs in comparison to the private banks. So, the higher non-performing assets of PSPs has led to decrease in the credit creation and a slowdown in the GDP growth rate. So, it is expected that the entry of digital banks would infuse the competition in the banking sector, reduce the government's monopoly, and improve the overall efficiency of the public sector banks. Thirdly, the digital banks are considered to be more efficient in comparison to the conventional banks. This is so because if you look at the conventional banks such as say ICICI, SBI, etc., all of these conventional banks need to have physical branches to provide banking related services. So this need to have physical branches in turn increases their operating costs. So these banks give loans at a high rate of interest because they would have to recover their operating cost. However, the digital banks do not have any physical branches because of which their operating cost is lower and hence they will be in a position to give loans at a low rate of interest leading to increase in the credit. More importantly, they would be able to cater to the credit needs of poor and marginal sections. They will be able to cater to the needs of say MSMEs and so on. And lastly, see, India has used technology, that is information and communication technology, to improve financial inclusion. This is evident in the success of digital payments, which has been made possible through the unified payment interface. Similarly, the fintech companies such as Paytm, PhonePe, etc., they have used technology in order to improve the financial inclusion. Similarly, we have given licenses to different types of differentiated banks such as the payment banks, small finance banks, and so on. So overall, we have been able to leverage technology in order to reach out to the people. So by using technology, we are able to bring more number of people into the fold of the banking sector. So the next logical step would be to facilitate the entry of the digital banks into the Indian economy. So these are some important aspects which one should understand from the perspective of the prelims as well as the mains examination. So based upon our discussion, you can try attempting this particular prelims question for practice and please also try to write an answer to this mains question for practice. Please let me know the answer to this particular prelims question for practice in the comment section given below. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now, this particular article appears on page number 1. See, recently the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has released the results of the phase 2 of the National Family Health Survey 5 report. Earlier, in the month of December 2020, it had released the results of the phase 1 of the National Family Health Survey 5 report. Now, the phase 1 covered approximately around 22 states and union territories, and the phase 2 covered the remaining states and union territories. And now the ministry has released the results of the phase 2 of the National Family Health Survey report. So how does this particular article becomes important from the perspective of the prelims and the mains examination? See, as far as the prelims examination is concerned, one can expect direct questions related to the National Family Health Survey, such as which agency releases this particular report, which agency conducts the survey, what is the objective of the survey, and so on. As far as the mains examination is concerned, see the highlights of this particular report, that is various indicators which this particular report highlights, particularly in terms of fertility rate, infant mortality, maternal mortality, percentage of institutional deliveries, and so on. All of these points can be incorporated as fodder points while substantiating your answers in GS paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, or they can also be used even in your essay paper as well. So this particular report tracks approximately around 131 indicators, but there is no need for you to get into each and every indicator. Only some important indicators are required to be remembered. So whatever important indicators are to be remembered, only those things we will be focusing. So let's first understand about the National Family Health Survey. This particular report is published by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has designated the International Institute for Population Sciences Mumbai as a nodal agency for conducting this survey. The basic objective of this particular survey is to provide for the high quality data on health and family welfare so that we are able to track our progress with respect to education, health and nutritional status of mothers, children and so on. Apart from that, based upon the data that we get from the National Family Health Survey, we can identify the critical gaps in our healthcare infrastructure, and to plug these critical gaps we can come out with certain specific schemes, programs and policies. So that is the basic objective. So this particular survey basically tracks performance on almost around 131 indicators related to fertility, literacy, child health, maternal health, access to family planning methods, institutional delivery and so on. As far as the National Family Health Survey is concerned, see, earlier we had conducted 4 rounds of the National Family Health Survey. The last round was conducted in the year 2015-16. So the latest National Family Health Survey is the 5th one. As far as the differences between National Family Health Survey 5 and 4 is concerned, the National Family Health Survey 5 has included certain new topics such as access to preschool education, disability, access to toilets, death registration and so on. So let us look into some important highlights of the National Family Health Survey 5 report, which could be used as a fodder points in your mains answer writing. See, first and foremost, if you look at the important aspects of demography, the most significant aspect has been that the sex ratio of the total population, which basically tells us the number of females per 1000 males, this has shown a significant improvement. In fact, now the number of females are more than the males. This can be understood from the fact that the sex ratio of the total population, as per the National Family Health Survey 4, this was 991, and now this sex ratio has increased to 1020, which means that for every 1000 males, now we have 1020 females. Now this is a significant improvement in our demography. So the latest National Family Health Survey has shown a significant improvement in the sex ratio in India. The second aspect is with respect to fertility rate. I hope you must be knowing the fertility rate concept. Fertility rate basically tells us as to how many children does a woman give birth to during her reproductive age. So this fertility rate in turn determines the population growth rate. Higher the fertility rate, higher would be the population growth rate. So as you can see here, the total fertility rate has reduced from 2.2 in National Family Health Survey 4 to 2 in the National Family Health Survey 5. Now why is this significant? Because if you look at the replacement level fertility, the replacement level fertility is 2.1. Replacement level fertility, as you know, denotes as to how many children should a woman give birth to so that the population remains stable. Which means that if the fertility rate becomes equal to replacement level fertility, then the population in a particular country remains stable. On the other hand, if the fertility rate reduces to below the replacement level fertility, then the population of a country can see a decline in the long run. So in case of India, as per the latest report, the fertility rate has dropped down to below the replacement level fertility. The replacement level fertility is 2.1, but now the total fertility rate of India stands at 2. With respect to infant and child mortality, as you can see, the IMR has reduced. Even under 5 mortality rate has also reduced. As far as the nutrition status of the children is concerned, the percentage of stunted children has reduced from 38% to 35.5%. Similarly, the percentage of underweight children has also reduced to 32%. Apart from that, there has been significant improvement in the full immunization among the children. So this has shown a significant improvement from 62% to 76% at all India level. Similarly, if you look at women health and empowerment, now the access to family planning methods among the women has improved. Earlier this was like 53%, now it has increased to 66%. So which means that now almost 66% of the women have access to family planning methods. Similarly, the percentage of institutional deliveries has also shown a significant improvement from 79 to 89%. In fact, in Puducherry as well as Tamil Nadu, the percentage of institutional delivery has increased to 100%, which shows a remarkable progress. And lastly, if you see the percentage of married women who usually participate in the household decisions, this has also shown an improvement from 84 to 87%. So these are some important indicators which you must remember from the perspective of the mains examination. You could incorporate these facts and figures in order to substantiate your answers in the mains examination. With this, let us now take up the next article. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day. The answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option D.